All right, so we'll get started with today's webinar. This webinar is about recruiters, which frankly, it's not going to really be a sales webinar. It's going to be more of, I'm not trying to sell you anything or really, because it's about the topic of it, which I think everyone in the legal profession is concerned about. But at the same time, what I do want to talk about today is I will talk about some of the ways you can improve your job search by doing the things that very good recruiters do, and also very good people that do legal placement, like what they do very well. And then after I talk about that, I will take a short break and then take some questions about this topic. Just to get started, and how I got interested in this topic and in the profession that I'm in is when I was in college, I worked very hard and did the same thing in law school, most people on this call and or webinar. And then I got out of law school and did a federal clerkship and got jobs with good firms. And then it came down to when I was switching firms, I started reaching out to talking to legal recruiters. And my thought was that I would be encountering people that had worked at a high level in the practice of law, were similarly motivated, professional, did good work, had a sense of commitment and so forth. Because I guess to make a long story short, I was looking for people that could mentor me and tell me what I should do. If you're in a firm and you're unhappy, then you need to understand what the alternatives are, what different firms are, and so forth. What's most appropriate for me? What kind of things I need to do with my career, and all those sorts of questions that you may be having about yourself right now if you're watching this. And I was wrong. The people that I was encountering when I started making all these phone calls were often not attorneys, but most of them didn't even understand what I did for a living or very much about the legal market. And at the time, they also had access to very few jobs and also didn't know about all the jobs that were out there or really much about most of the firms or the firms that would be appropriate or any of that information, any of the stuff that I believe could help me in my career. And because of that, I was discouraged. I was discouraged because I felt like there was no one out there that could show me. Let me just get this working on this mouse here. We keep having this problem every week, but there was no one out there that could really show me what I should be doing. One second. Okay, here we go. And that was a problem. It was a problem for me. And the other thing that I didn't like was when I would receive an interview, it just became a real sell job. Like you need to take this interview, and then the same thing with offers and so forth. And I realized that the industry at the time was more made up of salespeople than anything. And I was disappointed and disillusioned. And I wondered how could this type of person be responsible for my career? At the time, which is 20 plus years ago, the people that were recruiters typically were people that had issues practicing law. They quit because they didn't like it, or they couldn't pass the bar, or they got fired, or those sorts of things that were attorneys. But a lot of people weren't attorneys. And I really was realizing that there was no one in the legal field that could provide guidance to attorneys that were looking for new positions and really tell them what to do. And then I started going out in interviews and I got very curious and I started seeing the work product of recruiters, which had a lot of misspellings, problems with formatting. And a lot of it appeared to be cut and pasted from other documents. When you would call the recruiters, most of your stuff would go to voicemail, and the recruiter often would call back 1 or 2 days later. So you could never really get through to people. And I felt, and this was the way the entire industry was, and it still is to a great extent, I was angry. And I felt that attorneys really deserved something better and more substantial when they were looking for positions. And I felt that they deserved almost the same sort of quality, but if not better than lawyers, the good lawyers would do for their clients. And I felt like, how could you come so far and do so much in your career and then you get to this level and you rely on people to try to help you and give you information that don't necessarily know what they're doing. And it made me angry. And so I was looking for legal jobs and was getting offers. And I actually became much more interested in this problem of what was going on in the legal profession than anything else. That was became the most important thing to me, because I believe that if anybody's gone very far in their life, as is the case with lots of attorneys. In my case, I grew up outside Detroit and not the greatest circumstances. And it was a big deal to me becoming an attorney. And I really wanted to work with people that could give me a lot of options and could show me the ways to make better decisions, to understand me and so forth. And even to this day, that's a point that motivates me greatly. You can see on our site the articles we've done I've done in these videos like I'm doing right now. and other things, it's a real passion. And candidates that work with us, we provide them a lot of options because we want them to understand that we've got their back and are really trying to help them. And the idea is you matter, your career matters, finding positions for you matters, and your future matters. All this stuff is extremely important. And it's something that, that I've dedicated my life to. And so that's what I've learned. And so I've been in this role of managing legal job sites, companies that get attorneys business and managing. I've hired probably hundreds of recruiters to work with us and train them. But there's a big difference between what a legal recruiter is and a legal placement professional. And it's important for you to understand because this is really what we do at BCG. We're a legal placement firm, not a recruiting firm, and it's a much different type of profession. And so there is a role for recruiters. I mean, recruiters are awesome. The right recruiter can make a huge difference in your career and your life. But so are legal placement people like us. And it's important to understand what the difference is. A recruiter isn't necessarily required to have a lot of depth to the work that they do or to understand you particularly well. Even they get a job assignment or work with a certain type of candidate. And placement is a little bit different. And this is what I'm going to discuss. And I'm going to discuss how we work as a legal placement firm and how that whole process works. And so you can have a better understanding of everything. And it's just, there's a huge difference when you start looking for a job and you are working with people in terms of how you can get a job. And so that's what I want to talk to you about. But the main thing for you to understand is that almost everyone that you're understanding or that you're seeing in the legal community that is holding themselves out with legal jobs is a recruiter and not a legal placement professional. And then understanding that difference and able to make the distinction is really what this is about today. And in your career, in your life, the happiness you find and everything can often be determined by whether or not you're using a legal placement professional or a recruiter to help you in your job search. And I've seen one of the reasons I take this so seriously is I've seen a lot of people have fail and their careers go nowhere because they made a decision at the wrong time to work with the wrong person or company when they're searching for a job. And there's a huge difference, which I'll talk to you about today. So the first thing is what happens when you work with a recruiter. Most recruiters are difficult to reach, and that's not because they're bad people. It's just because that's the way that most recruiting firms work. They will work with a limited number of candidates. They'll have a limited number of jobs, and they'll often you'll call them, and they may have a couple of certain contacts, and they'll submit you to those contacts. And if something happens, great. If it doesn't, but if you're relying on that method to get a job, it's often can be very frustrating unless you're an outstanding candidate that was the best fit for any job you're applying to. So a lot of people, when they contact recruiting firms, they don't get a response, or the response they get from the recruiting firm is very negative, and they're made to feel like they're not important, or they're not sent a lot of positions, or the person they're talking to wants to get off the phone. That can give you the kind of the impression that there's something wrong with you. And often you may feel like you're not getting traction and with a recruiter. And a lot of people will only search for a job through a recruiter. And so if the recruiter can't get them anything, they get very frustrated and they feel like they're doing something wrong and that maybe, even they should give up on being attorneys. And it is unfortunate as to say, I've been witness to lots of people being very frustrated in the past, not getting jobs. And of course, it's just part of the business. And it depends in many cases on who you're working with. I've seen very talented attorneys from big firms and big schools and the best schools giving up practicing law and doing things like working in Home Depot or as bartenders, teachers in junior high schools and other things because they couldn't get a job. And they contacted a recruiter. They may be in a big city and a certain practice area, and they contacted a recruiter, and the recruiter said, I don't have anything for you, or tried a few openings for them, and that's all the recruiter had. And then the person gave up practicing law, which is absolutely insane, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And that's what can happen when you use recruiters. I even saw not too long ago a former associate from a major firm become a long haul truck driver. And none of this is to say that it's the fault of the recruiter, the fault of the candidate. And certainly people have different preferences for the kind of work that they do, and people can have psychological issues and so forth. But the problem many times with recruiters is unless it's a decent sized company, and our company, for example, has present over 200 employees that are researching openings and so forth. And this is a decent sized opening or a decent sized firm. Like the odds are they're not going to have a lot of openings and they're not going to have a lot of places they can send you. So what happens is if you're working with someone without a lot of contacts or resources to market you to a lot of places and so forth, you may conclude that there's nothing out there and then go in-house or quit the practice of law or take some other direction in your career. And I'm telling you, the market now is very good, but the market always isn't good. And when the market's not good, this happens to a lot of people. They give up and they say, "Oh, I'm, a recovering attorney and everything." When really what the case is that they had a very difficult time finding a position. And it's very important that you understand that depending on who you work with, is going to determine how effective your job search is. Attorneys, if you work with a recruiter, that you may leave the practice of law, you may develop some serious self-esteem issues, you may remain in positions you don't like, you may fail to discover opportunities that could benefit you, and lots of other things. I mean, I've been in this business for so long, but I can tell you that it used to be, for example, that if you wanted to buy a house in the city, you had to go see a real estate agent and you had to rely on the real estate agent to tell you about the openings. And you would go to one real estate agent, and one real estate agent might give you 3 openings. You might go to another and they might give you 20. But if you went to the one that had 3 or maybe 1 opening, you might conclude there was nothing good for sale. And so it's kind of like that with recruiters. Like some recruiters may only have a few openings and some of them may have a lot, but there's no central clearinghouse of positions or anything. And that's something that we've developed at our company at Lawcross and BCG, but there's for the most part, depending on who you go to, if you go to a large firm or a small firm or a placement firm as opposed to a recruiting firm, you may conclude that there's not a lot of openings for you out there. And there's openings for people of different types of backgrounds. If you're a consumer facing type of attorney, meaning you might do consumer bankruptcy, for example, there's going to be lots of firms for you, but some recruiters may only work with people from major firms. And so it's hard to get a sense of kind of what your marketability is when you talk to people. There's different geographic areas all over the country. There's certain markets like Wisconsin's and Austin are a very good market, but there's probably less than, there's very few recruiters that work there. So it just depends on what the recruiter you have working with has, the regions they work with, the number of firms they work with, their research, their mindset, and more. And that can make a big difference. If you work with a recruiter, if you're in Los Angeles, for example, or a major city, there's literally thousands of firms that our company has, thousands in major cities. In most states, there's several hundred firms. But the problem is the way the recruiting market works is recruiters may only work with a few firms at one time. So they may work with 10 firms, they may work with 20 firms. And so that'll give you a limited sense of what's going on unless you're working with placement. So an example is I recently spoke with an attorney that was in Sacramento, and he lived in San Diego, and he was commuting each weekend because he didn't believe that there were any jobs in San Diego because he'd been working with recruiters there who told him there were no jobs. So he literally had been spending a good portion for his child's life commuting back and forth. Within 1 month of talking to me, he found a new firm. And so the problem is the knowledge gap, like not understanding what you don't know, not understanding the opportunities that are out there. And it can happen many times when you're not actually actively out there seeking information and trying to find more openings or firms that will hire you even if they don't have openings. So it's important to understand, I think, what recruiting is and what recruiters do. And again, I have nothing, I think it's a great profession. I don't have anything against it. I'm not, this is not to be critical and attack competitors because I think there's definitely, there's nothing wrong with the business. But what's wrong with that is when you approach recruiters, relying on them to get you positions, when many times that's not appropriate. It is when you approach a placement firm, for example, to rely on them, but not necessarily a recruiter, because a recruiter does something different. And historically, they've recruited for a few jobs. Generally, it's for big firms because the big firms all use recruiters. And they're typically jobs that most people know about. And the recruiter doesn't need to understand the market. They don't need to understand the difference between whatever it is you do. There's all sorts of commercial lists and so forth where they can get access to the jobs of the top 50 firms and things. And all they need to do is understand what your practice area is and how to target people and tell them about that job. And there's not really much else they need to understand. So you don't need to be an attorney to be a recruiter. You don't need to have any special skills really. You need to be able to send emails and call people, but you just need to be able to find people that match the job you're recruiting for. And there's nothing, again, that's a role and the firms need it. And if you're targeted and it's a better job for you, there's nothing wrong with a recruiter helping you with that. It's not, and they may be the one that gets you off the fence to apply. So there's nothing, they're serving a purpose. And I don't have, again, anything critical to say about recruiters, but what they are doing is the recruiting. When you get a phone call or when you get an email from a recruiter about a specific job, they typically know about that job and they'll know something about it. And their job is to try to attract applicants. And so they're just doing their job. And there's nothing, again, nothing wrong with that. And then you can send the recruiter your resume. And what they'll do is they'll do the best to get you in front of the firm. They may call up the firm and chat with them. They may just send the resume. They may write a letter. There's all sorts of different things. So this is pretty much how recruiting has worked forever. I would say that when I say forever, I've been in this business long enough that I've met pretty much the first legal recruiters in the United States and spent a lot of time with them and learned. And it's having the ability to contact people and so forth and tell them about the jobs. It's not necessarily meaning it's a good way for you to get a job all the time, but it's recruiting. And again, there's nothing at all wrong with it. And it's just what it is. And the problem with that is that because you're being sold something, meaning someone's going to try to tell you about a job. The recruiter they're not really equipped to advise you. It's your job to make a decision if that's the best for you. It's your job to make the decision if there's other options for you. It's your job to learn more about the firm and what's going on. The recruiter may have some good talking points, but in most cases, the recruiter doesn't know what they're doing, nor do they have to. It's not necessarily a requirement for recruiting. They're basically your job. Their job is to try to get you out of your seat and into an interview and prepare you for the interview, hopefully, and get you the job that they're recruiting for. And in the old days, a lot of recruiters would send people's resumes to every firm in the city. Long ago, over 20 years ago, I met a recruiter that had every top 50 law firm programmed to automatically send a resume through a fax. We used to send things through faxes in the city. Now, that's not something that happens anymore, of course, and the profession definitely has cleaned up. But if you aren't careful, a recruiter may try to send your resume to a lot of places that they shouldn't be. And then without your authorization. Of course, at BCG, like everyone has to authorize the firms and so forth online and with us in our database. But so this is how a lot of recruiting firms work. A lot of them work. A lot of them still work that way. Most recruiters don't do that, but it can happen when you trust your career to someone who's trying to sell as opposed to finding the right firms. And this is not, again, you could say the same statement about car salesmen. You could say it about real estate agents. So I'm not, again, any type of sales position, generally, you could make the statement, but a lot of people in the industry can be manipulative, dishonest, and really looking out mainly for themselves, and their motivation can be at odds with your career. And so I've seen a lot of different types of people in the industry. I haven't hired them, but of course I run across, and I've been doing this a long time. There's people that are minimum wage type people that are used to making phone calls. There's car and appliance salesmen. There's attorneys with or without good pedigrees, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that the person is skilled at getting your resume and hopefully can fill jobs. And that's the skill. And the majority of them, even when there's some people aren't working at home, have always worked at home. And a lot of them really do enjoy having a lot of flexibility, meaning they're not accountable to people for their time. Some of them don't have a lot of interest in what they're doing. And a lot of them are attorneys that may have gone to good law schools and worked in big firms and believe that they're entitled to respect based on that, not necessarily the recruiting skill. And they will tell you about their past all the time and so forth. And that's fine. People have a right to be proud of the things they've done. But the point is that the job is really more, in my opinion, about advancing careers. And a lot of attorneys are people that were not necessarily good at practicing law and only pursued it because it looked like an easier job where it might have given them more flexibility, entitled them to be respected based on their backgrounds and things that they've done in the past. and hopefully made a good income. And that's one of the problems, in my opinion, with the industry is that a lot of people that are doing the work are people that can't do. They always say that people that can't do teach, people that I don't know, but it's a lot of people that do it are aimless and looking for something that offers the allure of easy money, free time, respect for the past achievements, and so forth. And again, there's nothing wrong with any of that. There's definitely everyone needs to find a profession that matches their interests, but these aren't necessarily people that have not succeeded at something. Isn't always the best path to put your career, and there's just something to be careful about. A lot of them are that don't kind of rely on placement, and most of them it's a sales type position, so they're interested in commissions, and that's the most important thing. And a lot of times, what happens in this industry is we go through ups and downs. And when I personally, our company always does well because of the kind of work that we do, but at the same time, a lot of placement firms or recruiting firms will basically go out of business when the economy slows down, and then they'll start up when it does. And recruiters will start doing other things when the economy slows down, and then they'll go back when it does. It's a sales job, and there's nothing wrong with that again. And the typical model for almost all recruiters in the country is they target attorneys based on the largest law firms with the best pedigrees, and then call and try to find resumes and network with those people, and then apply them to positions that pretty much most people know about at large law firms. And they can make placements very well. There's tricks and things you can use to get people to go in interviews. There's tricks that I've heard about for other things. And some recruiters have big personalities and push people that don't have big personalities into doing things. I don't see it that often, but I've heard about lying and so forth. And it can be a dirty world, and it's a dirty world because in a market where where individuals are not making a lot of placements and where they have to rely on their sales abilities and ability to manipulate people and so forth, it can be, and there's a lot of money often at stake. It can turn into kind of a nasty thing. I remember working with a candidate not too long ago that had gotten an offer at a firm in Seattle through another recruiter, not myself. And I just got him an interview at his dream firm in Chicago, and the firm in Chicago was going to bring him back for a second interview. But he was senior and heading a business, and he was a little nervous because he knew things could go either way. But he'd grown up in Chicago. His wife worked there, and he had 3 children, but he was unemployed and had been for months, and he really needed a position. And he called me in a panic, and he said his recruiter told him that the firm in Seattle was going to draw his offer. We didn't accept it that day. And the recruiter was upset, and he didn't accept it immediately. And what should he do? And so my advice to him, given the uncertainty of it, was that he should accept it. And I told him that he should confirm it with the firm that he actually did need to respond by 5 p.m. and just explain that could he have a little bit more time just to discuss the situation with his wife. And he told the recruiter he was going to call to confirm things, but the recruiter urged him not to and said everyone was on pins and needles and that he needed to accept right away, and told him they didn't have any time for any more interviews and the firm needed him to start right away, or the firm would make an offer to another candidate. So he accepted the offer. A few weeks later, he was living in Seattle and he was alone and unhappy at the firm. His family moved out several months later, and it wasn't a good situation. And he found out within weeks of after starting there that the firm never had a deadline, and he'd been manipulated into accepting the offer. So these things happen. We don't play those games at our company, but certainly I've seen a lot of things like that, and I hear about things like that all the time. Again, I don't know if he would have gotten his dream job in Chicago. The firm certainly wasn't in a rush to re-interview him, but he might have. And I see things like this a lot. So you just have to be careful, because with recruiters, like, they have an incentive to try to get you to accept jobs. And legal recruiters tend to be very focused on job orders. The way it works is a firm, there's lists that come out that are emailed out from services of large law firm jobs to recruiters, but they basically are getting the jobs from the law firm websites and from the largest law firms. And then the recruiters will, in big cities, like if you're in a big city, you'll probably get several calls about the same job. And so the recruiters recruit on job orders. And once they have a job order, they just start calling and doing whatever they can to attract resumes. And that's just kind of how it works. And most recruiters, if they're not placement firms, they're recruiters. And so they're recruiting for specific jobs. And and they're pretty much uninterested in people calling them on the phone or attorneys emailing them resumes out of the blue. Their whole mindset is about job orders and specific jobs, and which is fine. That's just how the business works. You see here, and then law firms typically think that recruiters are very pushy. A lot of times the recruiters will call the firms, and they can be very aggressive. Law firms get annoyed by recruiters. The whole role of recruiting coordinator, it's funny, but the reason that role is there is that the recruiters used to be talking to the hiring partners in the law firms and so forth. And the hiring partners didn't like that. They didn't like it for a lot of reasons because it took a lot of time and so forth away from billable work. But also what the firms noticed is that the hiring partners would always get recruited away by the recruiters. And so they stopped that process. And firms can be often manipulated by recruiters as well. And many times the resumes, they just receive resumes with no information and so forth. So they don't provide a lot of information, and it's more of a salesperson job, and it's finding a product, presenting it, and not a lot of interest. That's again, when you're like a auto salesman, like what happens in the auto sales world is salespeople typically move around between the models that are selling the best. When again, I'm from Detroit. When Japanese cars started getting very popular, all the people that were selling Chevrolets went over to Toyota and Honda, and it's just kind of like that way. Like salespeople will move around, and recruiters will. Most of them, some of them do. Most of them do not specialize. They're just going after what is hot and trying to get commissions, and that's just how the business works. And again, it's not really. It's just something to understand. It's how it works. It's a difficult profession, and then this for candidates in a lot of cases, and a lot of people do not like working in recruiting firms, and recruiters often have non-compete agreements and are expected to increase quotas and do all sorts of things to stay hungry and under the firm's control. And it's just, I don't know how much to talk about it, but it's a very competitive industry. And other recruiters are always trying to destroy the credibility of other recruiters and recruiting firms. And if you are a candidate and you're working with one recruiting firm and you tell them about another recruiting firm that you're working with, they always have ways to say negative things. And there's a lot of movement in the industry. There tends not to be a lot of loyalty to recruiting firms. The reason is because for recruiters, they're basically trying to get the highest commissions and so forth, and where they can get the most candidates and so forth. So they will leave very often. And there's just a lot of dirt and so forth in the industry, and there's a lot of unpleasant things about it. And that's one reason a lot of times recruiters have a bad reputation. And in many cases, not in all, it depends on what you're looking for. If you are looking for at a specific job, then a recruiter with that job and information about that job with a good relationship with a firm can often be a very good thing to use. But it often can be very dangerous if you're doing a full-on job search for a recruiter. And because of the fact that one of the things is that the recruiters often only know about a few jobs and not a lot. A recruiter can get an attorney's resume. It often, your experience may be very similar to this. The recruiter will send your resume to a few firms, will never follow up. You'll never hear from them again. And that happens all the time. It's very common in the industry for people to get a call from a recruiter or talk to a recruiter and then never hear from the recruiter again. And this is just for your information why it happens. Many times, just the recruiter, if you don't get interviews right away, the recruiter may assume that you're not marketable and they don't have a very good understanding of the legal market or how to market attorneys. I will tell you, and again, I learn new stuff in this every day, but every attorney out there pretty much is marketable to some extent. If you're been disbarred and some other things, or you can't decide on a practice area and then you're probably not going to be marketable if you have some issues like that, but most attorneys are marketable. But the problem with most recruiters is they're following the line of like, only this person's marketable. Like they have to have a top school, or they have to have a top firm, or they have to be one to so many years. And so they have this kind of formula they follow. And anytime you find someone following a formula like that, it's a sign that they probably don't know what they're doing. If you have access to the jobs and the research in the market, then and you look at it kind of the way I do, it's then, and our people in our company do, then you realize that there's an incredible amount of opportunity out there. And when I say incredible, I'm talking about there are tens of thousands of law firms in the United States. And out of that information, there's so much you can learn about hiring and needs and things if you really put your head down. And And so that's one of the things, but I'll talk more about that a little bit. But a lot of recruiters, again, they're salespeople. And it's, again, there's salespeople in every industry. If the recruiter thinks that you're not marketable or that a couple firms are not interested in you, then they may reach the conclusion that no one's interested in you. So again, if I look at a candidate, like I see in a market like Los Angeles, at least 5,000 potential opportunities. Most recruiters, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, but if they only work with 50 firms and there's only 3 openings, may only see 3,000 opportunities. So there's always going to be a lot of different ways of looking at your candidacy. And a lot of times recruiters will believe that if they submit you and you don't get any interest, then they may not even want to tell you that. So they may be embarrassed and not respond to you. And they may not realize that there's a lot of places that can be interested in you. It's very interesting. But the other thing is that a lot of times recruiters are more focused on job orders, not candidates. They may be firm centric and just focused on jobs, or they may be candidate centric and focused on candidates. But a lot of recruiters will jump from job order to job order, and so they only want to work on job orders that look like the best, and they'll put their efforts in the things that are going to rely on the fastest commissions, which is how any market works, and that's fine. But they will view candidate calls, job inquiries, and so forth as things that are going to distract them from working on job orders. So it's not necessarily you; it's just the way the market works, and so the average recruiter may not understand what to do with certain candidates that are outside their kind of universe. And the other thing is recruiters tend to have a bad reputation, and just like salespeople do in a lot of industries, because they're just doing what they can to make placements. And they may tell law firms and candidates whatever they think will advance the ball. They may not say certain things. They can play all sorts of tricks to get what they want. They may, again, try to manipulate you into taking offers. They may give you the impression before they submit your resume that the firm is definitely going to interview you. And they learn these tricks, and it's just because they're trying to survive. But at the same time, there's not a lot of substance. So there's more flash than substance. And so they're perfecting these tricks and sales pitches where they put their time into researching the market and so forth, would often be much better off. Recruiters are often is about getting a job order and then finding people that the law firm could interview. Many times, if you get a job order in a recruiting firm, you're expected to contact 50 to 100 people for each job order. And a lot of times they'll break up the firms in a given city. So certain people are responsible for certain firms. And then what'll happen is if you contact that recruiting firm about a job, the only jobs that recruiting firm will tell you about are ones that the firms they personally represent, maybe not other people in their office, which can make it difficult. And you might only be made aware of 10 firms in a given city or something. And so again, none of this is bad. It's only bad if you're relying on the recruiter to get you a job. And having a laser focus on certain jobs is good for law firms. And it's good for law firms to have, of course it is, to have people that are trying to get people in there that they need to work. And that can be to your advantage if you're only interested in a certain firm or certain jobs. But in my opinion, and this is how I operate, I do believe that in terms of what I do, it's important to allow people to know about the full extent of the market and their marketability so you can make the best decisions. It's many times what happens is it's like going out on one date and getting married. It doesn't make sense. You should know what the market's like out there. And many times hiring the average recruiter is like hiring a contingency litigator, taking down a contingency case and hoping to settle it with a phone call, demanding money from the other side without ever filing a lawsuit, writing a letter, or doing the work necessary. So the contingency litigator could win a quick settlement, but it's unlikely. In most cases, they need to file a lawsuit, litigate and stick it out, go to trial, and nothing's easy. And neither is getting most attorneys the sorts of jobs that they want. To do this business right, if you're looking for a position, it's actually a lot of work. And you should be exposed to, in my opinion, all the potential opportunities there are for you in the market. And that means places that have jobs now, have probably had jobs in the past. If they like to interview people like you, it means understanding the firms that are the best in your practice area. It means understanding your strengths and research and a lot of different types of work, because understanding your marketability and so forth is important. I have had different experiences, but I was talking to it's funny. I was at a reunion not too long ago, and I was talking to this guy that grew up in the same a smaller town I did in Michigan, and he was telling me that he was depressed because he was saying he's not. It was very difficult for him to meet girls after getting divorced and everything. And I was like, this is just absolutely crazy because he's a very wealthy developer, a good looking guy, all sorts of stuff. And if he were in a bigger market, he wouldn't have that problem, or he would be more aware of what's going on. And he's, of course, never tried dating sites and all that sort of stuff. If you're marketing yourself to a larger group of people, you're going to know your marketability, and it's going to change your life and your career. I've gotten many people jobs. It's taken years to get certain people jobs just by checking in with them week after week. And in this business, it can take a long time to get someone the right job for them. And you may need to look at a lot of people, and then you may need to look at people again. Or look at firms again. There's a concept called the moving parade. And what that is at any point in time, the parade's in one place. I could approach a law firm on a Tuesday and ask them about a candidate, and they may say, no, thanks. And then I could approach them the following Tuesday, and they could say, you know what, I thought about it, yes. Or I could approach them 3 months later, I thought about it, yes. And the other thing that happens that we have at our company too is that all the time a law firm will say, no, we're not interested in someone. And then weeks or months later, because we keep making them aware that the person's interested, they'll come back and they'll say yes. So there's a lot to this business, and it's exciting. So now I'm going to talk about my favorite topic, which is legal placement distinguished from legal recruiting. And I did not enjoy the recruiting part of this webinar just because I don't like saying there's no sense really talking negatively about a profession, but there are some negative things about it. Legal placement is much different, and that's what we do at BCG. It's a much different mindset, and it's a legal placement company like ours makes placements of people in suitable positions, and we're not necessarily recruiting for job orders. At our company, we use the entire market as a guide, as opposed to an individual opening or cluster and openings of firms. We use data science. We use over 20 years of openings. We use openings, history of openings to understand which firms have needs, where there's openings that's going to suit someone's interest, the firms that are most likely to hire someone. And a placement professional is going to ask which firms have ongoing needs and is interested in this type of attorney. Whereas a recruiter is going to ask, whose resume do I need to get to send to a certain firm for a job? And that's a big difference. But again, they're both fine ways of filling openings, but they're different ways. One is more candidate centric and the other is more law firm centric. And to place an attorney in position, the placement professional really needs to look at lots of markets. I have people that approach me and they might be in a very niche practice area. They might be very senior. They might be very junior. And in order to place them, I will look at all sorts of markets. Some of my biggest success stories, most of my biggest success stories involve, and when I say big success stories, people that just seem completely unmarketable, involve a lot of times multiple markets, different size firms, all sorts of things, and outside the box thinking that you normally, wouldn't get from a recruiting firm. That means I can move very senior people from one market to another if they have the right skills. I can move very junior people, the big gaps, and there are all sorts of things can happen when you start looking at multiple markets. And it's harder and it takes a lot more work. So it's a lot of work, but it's different. And it requires a lot of commitment. It requires sticking with someone for a long period of time. It requires constantly, if you're a candidate of ours, you constantly sending new jobs and new firms and readjusting and increasing the size of market, prodding you to look at more markets, prodding you to be more specific in terms of your practice area, to all sorts of things that are a lot of fun. And it's fun getting people positions that normally would be very limited in the market. From my standpoint, the placement professional is very committed to the people with whom they work. Once I accept a candidate, you're part of our candidate and you're a client, which means a client means someone that's under the care and protection of another. And our job really is to get the person would do whatever it takes to find the person a position that they're happy with. And it's not about one-off jobs. It's about finding a good home for the candidate. If you couldn't believe it, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I will. Each week, I made several placements a week last year. And out of all the placements, I didn't call and try to talk one person into accepting a job. Typically, the people that are getting offers through us every week, lots of them, are making decisions on their own about what they want to do once they get an offer. It's not a sales job here. We work for you, and it's just different. And continually, we're always sending people jobs and firms and working with them until we find positions that suit them. I have people in major markets in New York and so forth, and small markets and mid-sized markets that I work with. And some people have been going out on interviews every couple of weeks for a couple of years. And for whatever reason, may have not gotten the offers that they want because they need to work on their interviewing skills, or sometimes there just wasn't a good match. And so we're happy to work with people over a long period of time and not drop people because they're not instantly taking a job. And our company, we communicate with our candidates every week. A big push of what we do is making sure that we're on top of every single job in the market. So we have a lot of resources that go into that. I actually have over 200 people supporting me in my efforts, but that's finding people in the right place. And most of the people that I work with are actually actively seeking a new position, and not always. Sometimes they're what are called passive job seekers. But when people are working with us, we're always sending them jobs, we're always sending them firms, and realizing that you're a human being with needs, wants, and goals, and that you need someone that's going to stick with you and help you find what you're looking for. And that's often easier said than done, but that's what it's about. It's about making sure that you get exposed to what you want. And the other thing I just wanted to bring up too is, the typical understanding of recruiter is someone that only works for the best candidates. And that's, again, we work with lots of very good candidates, but at the same time, the market it's a huge market. Everyone out there deserves to be able to find a position. And to the extent that you're experienced in a practice area and you have good background, we can definitely help almost everyone. A legal placement professional also tends to have a lot of experience in the legal industry and is also attracted to this business for the right reasons. And it's important because when you're working with people, you want to be able to make your case to law firms. So they need to be able to be interested in you and also understand about you personally. So they want to understand your identity. They want to understand what makes you tick. And we do things at BCG, like, for example, we give all of our candidates a DISC test to highlight their strengths. We ask a lot of questions and require them. We write in-depth letters and do all sorts of things because we want to make sure that law firms are able to see you as a person when you apply to them, as opposed to just a resume, which is how most things work. And that means having meaningful conversations, it's preparing you for interviews. When you have them, it means understanding what it's like to have been in your shoes and understanding kind of your insecurities and also your strengths, and understanding many times when it makes sense for you to stay at a firm or when it makes sense for you to leave a firm. And it's not a sales job. At our company, we make enough placements that it's not, for us, the bigger picture is actually much more important. It's trying to talk someone into ever taking a job or an interview. And it's not a sales job. And in a placement professional, to really do this job correctly, and you need to have access to the whole market and understand the whole market. There's well over 25,000 law firms in the United States. The number is multiples of that. But these are law firms of decent size that have positions on an ongoing basis and so forth. And that could be good for you at any time. And you have to understand this business and the candidates, you have to understand those firms. You have to be getting those firm openings all the time. You have to be keeping track of all these openings. You have to, know about every single job that's out there. And this can make a huge difference between having the ability to get you a job and not. There's so many firms out there that will boggle your mind. And there's different types of people that you get jobs from in firms. So some firms have legal recruiting firms, legal recruiting coordinators. Other firms have hiring partners. Others have COOs. Others have human resources directors. There's a whole, huge list of people that need to be contacted and monitored, and where you can't get that sort of information normally. And then you have to be able to classify that information. You have to use data science in the background to get that in, to understand that information. And we're very good at it. We started lawcrossing.com, I believe, in 2003. So that's over 20 years ago. And that's a big site for getting legal jobs in the market and a huge source of resources. And we're able to find a lot of jobs for candidates all the time. And attorneys are often daily are amazed because of the number of positions we have. And it's not a job centered position. It's more of a position that we do where we're out there doing research and so forth. And And this can make a big, difference for you. So if you're looking for a position, and again, this is something you don't need, no one, you can do a lot of the work that we do on our own if you go into a city, but what you need to do is you need to research every firm in the markets that you're interested in. And then you need to contact them if you can. And you need to understand their practice areas and who's strong and review various lists and so forth to see who's the strongest. And it can make, and then if you were able to take all that information and see candidates that are like you that have gotten interviews that those in the past and so forth, it can make a major difference in your career and what happens. And then the other thing about legal placement professionals, they typically will have access to lots of geographic markets. This means that they will know if you're a candidate in one market, that you're probably going to be marketable in different markets, and will try to get you to look at multiple markets in your search. And it's very important that the placement professionals you're working with have access to the entire market. California, for example, is a huge market. There's tens of thousands of law firms and up and down the whole coast. And so it's important to know about all the firms there, but it's also important for a recruiter to know about different markets and places you might be interested in living, because that can make a huge difference. And knowing about the openings and the past openings and the firms that are strong and the ones that have interviewed people like you can be helpful as well. And yeah, so this stuff can be very helpful in understanding kind of the nuances of what's going on. And then the technology aspect of the work that we do is also very important. Being able to track down jobs, alert you about new jobs, making matches with different opportunities and so forth is very important. And then having a historical list of all those positions. And again, if a recruiter is working from home, they're not going to have that information. They're not going to have the work to the ability to do the amount of work that is required. I will tell you that the very sophisticated people that do job study this, and a lot of times when they're in big firms, will look at sometimes hundreds of firms in their search, and they might look at hundreds of firms out of a universe that they could be looking at of thousands of firms, but they'll often look at hundreds of firms. And the idea is that they want to be able to get the best options for themselves. And technology is very important. We have a whole team of programmers. We've always had a whole team of programmers. And so it's important to make sure that your placement firm is getting you out to firms very quickly as well. The reason for that is once a firm has scheduled interviews for a few candidates, they typically will not pay a lot of attention to the resumes that come later. Also, humans are humans, so they will often bond with the first people that walk in the door, and then they'll ignore the people that come later. So it's very important when, regardless of how you're finding a job, that you apply early, and because law firms will bond with the people that apply first. And then the other thing that we do with technology, I think, is being able to track who's most viable for a given position is a very important thing. So all of our positions for the past 20 plus years, we keep track of, and we can see patterns, and we know certain law firms will hire litigators in the fall. Other firms will hire fourth or fifth year corporate attorneys every 2 years. I mean, everything kind of runs in cycles, and you can see that. And again, there's certain firms that will have ERISA attorneys every 2 years and have done that for a decade. And so we can actually predict the future many times, and it works. And what happens in good economies, work versus bad economies. And it's fun. So we have data scientists and stuff that we work with that give us that information. And then that can help you when you're searching for a position, find positions that no one else would know about. And we only really learn about using machine learning and increasingly artificial intelligence, which is much harder to understand many times. And I don't want to explain it, but if a firm is likely to be interested in someone, it gives us a huge competitive advantage, and it gives you a huge competitive advantage. It means you're going to walk into a place where they need you, and where we know they need you, and when we know they need you even before they need you, or they've identified it. And you can walk into firms and be the only applicant, and that can make a huge advantage. And that's something that if you're working in this job and working with a recruiter, isn't necessarily seen. They may know about these kind of patterns at a few firms, but it's very difficult to do without large scale machine learning and data science. And also you may often be competing with people with better qualifications and so forth when there is an opening. And so it can be more difficult to get jobs when there's job openings. So these are the stuff that we do, and allowing us to understand firms better and give us a lot of insights into different practice areas and so forth. And then this is just a few more quick things, then I'll take a quick break and we'll do questions. But one of the things that we do is we try to get an understanding of the market and our candidates in order to communicate effectively to law firms a good work product. And so we try to present the same sort of work product that will go out to that a law firm would produce. We also try to provide a lot of information about people's personality profiles and other things are important to us because it can help get you in the door. And we try to be very professional with our work product. And we have people in the company that proofread things and so forth and view your resume and make everything look good. And then constantly we're doing our best to make connections with law firms and providing them that sort of information as well. And not just pitching resumes, but really trying to understand what their needs are. And then again, it's about every law firm. So the market out there is huge. And that's one of the biggest things I can leave you with is there's always a lot of people out there and a lot of recruiters will raid the same firms and do nothing with the others. But in our position, we're really not raiding firms. We're just working with people that are for certain positions in the market and helping them find positions. And that's what we're doing. And most of our recruiters are very busy, simply based on people that have approached us, and which keeps us occupied with very good attorneys. And it's not how we operate. One of the ways I like to describe it is it's the difference between an attorney handing out business cards to people charged with petty crimes and being a partner in an AmLaw, big law firm that comes in. One of them is going to have different skills than the other. So the one on the street is not going to be able to provide you the same level of service in most cases than the partner in the law firm who's comfortable and has a lot of people working for them at their disposal and so forth. And most recruiters are more like the person handing out the cards. And it's not something you would understand or should understand, but that's how things work a lot of times. And without rating firms, it gives us the time to look at the more cerebral aspects of the position and then build relationships and so forth. The other thing is that there has to be a lot of interest in the subject matter, and you have to love it and not simply be there to make money. It's a lot of recruiters are when you talk to them, they'll say they like it because of the money or the lifestyle and so forth. But it's placement is different. It's as serious, in my opinion, as practicing law, if not more serious, because it's your candidates' lives that are helping other people. And you have to spend a lot of time, I think, writing articles, studying the market, understanding the dynamics. And it's not simply about making placements. It's a profession. And as a placement professional, I believe the people that work for us should always be working on getting better. It's not about going to sales seminars and so forth. It's about learning about markets, firms, trends, and how to find the best opportunities. Our recruiters are very closely trained in our company. We call them placement professionals, and everything we do is measured and critiqued very aggressively and looked at closely. And the goal of this is at a corporate level, we do an incredible job of it with candidates, but it's making sure that people are accountable to their candidates and the professions as a whole. And this is extremely important because we want to do whatever we can to keep the standards very high for our candidates. And it's quite a bit of work, and it requires a lot of dedication and alignment of goals and so forth. It's often, I'll just say it, it's very difficult for most recruiters to handle the kind of work that we do. It's very demanding and something we take very seriously. Almost every person we hire, is one of hundreds of applicants that we get. And we're very concerned about their ability to service people and to come to us. And it doesn't really, most of them are from very good law firms and so forth, but it's very rare that someone comes into our company as well that's an experienced recruiter because they've learned bad habits. We typically train people. This is about all I have to say about this, and I don't need to really say much more, but I think that this is a business that often doesn't have a lot of substance and can attract the wrong sort of people. Legal placement is a different type of business. It's more like practicing law. It's more data driven about very small details and working with people for the long run. And it's a long-term view of the business and people and really trying to get you people in the right type of positions as opposed to a different way of looking at it. It's about research, data, technology, training. And this is what we do. That's really all I have to say about it. I was surprised that this webinar came up today. This was based on more of just an online marketing piece, but I was happy to do it when I saw what it was going to be today. But One of the things I just would say as a piece of advice when you're looking for a position, and is that just really to realize the massive potential that you have. Everything that I've said today is just about how I think about placement as opposed to recruiting. But the idea is to realize the massive potential you have and not to be discouraged if you talk to a recruiter and the recruiter makes you feel like you don't have, there's not a lot they can do for you because many times they don't understand. And as a matter of fact, most people, almost everyone in the recruiting business, they understand sections of it, but they don't understand the big picture. And the big picture is that everyone is needed by a firm somewhere. And most of the time, the smaller the market you look at, the more opportunities you will have, and the more you will be in demand. And the larger the market, often if you have very good qualifications, also the more demand you will be. But you have to really realize just how exceptional you are and how exceptional everybody is, because you just can't be in a position where you're not understanding all of the opportunities out there. And I think probably what motivated me originally to do this piece is just the whole idea that I've seen so many people get discouraged about their marketability, or they're trying to go from a small firm to a large firm, or they're trying to do something or another in their career, and they get discouraged because they talk to the wrong person. And just realizing that the recruiting is often a sales position where people are just working leads, and the leads that they believe are the best, and they're often wrong. And that it's not something that you should take personally. People are just following models. And the more you understand that, the more you'll realize that you can do much better many times when you really research any market you go into and get a lot of positions. I'm yet to find an attorney that isn't marketable. Every single attorney I've ever encountered is marketable to a great extent. Now, there's reasons you might not be marketable, reasons you probably should be doing something else, but everyone is marketable. So just don't use kind of the framework that I'm talking about of legal placement, which means researching the market in a lot of depth, looking at multiple markets, highlighting your strengths, trying to make a connection with the employer, and your whole career and the opportunity you have to change. So I'll take a quick break just for 2 minutes. And then when I come back, I'll answer as many questions as everyone has. We do these questions live every week, and it's a fun part of my week. You can ask questions about pretty much anything you want and related to this profession or related to legal placement or your career. Okay, let's see. Let me just get this first question. I'm a top 10 law student starting at a smaller firm. I did not start at a big law firm, which been started at a law firm, but I would like to join down the line. How soon would it be a good time to start looking at a big law firm job? And how can I best position myself for a position? I'm a litigator, and the firm I will be joining does a lot of work for individual, small and medium-sized regional companies. Will I still be able to transition to a larger firm? Yes, you will be able to. One thing I do recommend a lot of times, if you're in a top 10 law school, it shouldn't be that hard to transition to a larger law firm after you get a couple years of experience. Even 1 year would probably be enough. What tends to happen is attorneys will often start at smaller law firms and then move to larger law firms later. If you went to a top 10 law school, it really shouldn't be much of a problem. The reason is that what happens is the law firm will have people that they hire as first years will leave, or they may get extra case. Other firms will get cases and so forth. And then when that happens, then you can certainly step in and work there. It's not really much of a problem. People, especially if you want to, even if you're at the bottom of your class from a top 10 law school, you should be able to get into a larger law firm. Many times it may be looking at different markets. Maybe one of your solutions, working in branch offices, is another way. Another thing that I recommend to a lot of people is if you can do a clerkship. So clerkships can make you much more marketable, and they're often fairly, depending if you look at a lot of markets, they're not too difficult to get many times. Okay, let me see. Okay, I'm looking to some insight on, let me just see if I can type this over here. Oh, that's actually working pretty well now. Into the LA market, ideally, I'd like to join the venture capital group of a type focused firm in LA, but I'm open to other corporate focused roles. Do you have any insight into big law firms in LA? Are there any firms to avoid? I'm an M&A second year, originally from California. Yeah, you shouldn't have too much trouble moving to LA if that's what you want to do. There's lots of firms in LA that do that kind of work. The big thing I recommend, I'm not saying it's 100% necessary, but one of the things I would recommend is if you take the bar exam, that's going to make you much more marketable and just much more marketable. So you'll have a much better chance of getting a position in LA if you have the bar exam. The problem is law firms always get burned by people that don't take the bar and then they move out here and fail because they don't have time to study and get on deals or whatever. So just taking the bar exam can make a big difference. Once if you're at a Vault 10 firm and you do take the bar exam, you really can probably move to almost any firm. You're in a different, if you're trying to join a venture capital group, that maybe it's a little bit different of a practice area. Pretty much all the firms you've heard of, large law firms, are going to be open to moving. Now, one thing I would say, or places where you get positions. One thing I would say though about the LA market is, despite the size of the market, meaning it's a very large geographic area of 8, 9 million people, it's really for corporate. It's never been a major market. It's San Francisco and the Bay Area and Palo Alto has always been much larger. Most people that relocate to LA, or especially from New York firms, always are a little bit disappointed in terms of the sophistication of the work available. A nice thing about, and it depends on the firm. Obviously, if you go to Scattered or something, that you're going to be exposed to very good work. But one of the problems I think of LA is that it is a mid cap market. You're often going to be staying in a little bit longer, maybe in New York if you're junior, would be smarter. There are often many more opportunities in the Bay Area for corporate people than there are in LA. LA has always been a good market, but it's certainly nothing the Bay Area in terms of the amount of corporate work available and the demand for good people. So that's something that I would think about if it was me. Okay, let me see. These are good candidates here on today. Wow, interesting. There are people. I'm sorry about that webinar. The webinar we did today. I think it's an interesting topic, but I don't know if I was an attorney, if I would want to sit and listen to some guy talk about industry placement and recruiting. But it's okay. One of those weeks where I didn't really have the time to before we started. I'm a senior associate at one of the ECBC firms, Gunderson, WS Wilson, and so forth, and do a lot of M&A work. I like my firm, but the nature of the firm is we're mostly sell side work, since we represent so many early stage companies who then get sold to bigger fish. I find sell side work draining for various reasons. It's also hard from a client development perspective, since selling your client means losing your client 90% of the time. Is there any firms or practice areas built around strategic buyers where someone can make up this primary practice? Yes, but if it was me, if you want to contact us, I can give you a list of those firms. That's something I can completely understand where you're coming from. One of the things I would recommend, just in terms of where you're coming from, though, in your question, is that it's really not that hard from a development standpoint, because if you're doing sell-side work, you just need to basically market yourself and develop a presence for yourself as someone that does a lot of that work. And that means writing articles about it, webinars, this kind of thing. It's also talking at different events where you're going to be talking to early stage companies and positioning yourselves that way. That can be, and then being seen as a go-to person for that. So even though you may not see the business opportunity in what you're doing, I do believe that there's a lot of business opportunity in what you're actually doing, because you can be seen as someone that does that type of work. You can also market yourself to venture capital firms and so forth that would be funding those early stage companies before that happens, and be on their radar, and then start getting a lot of referrals to that. And then even when the clients are sold, you can still get business from that. So it's always important just to look at what's in front of you and do things that way. And then once you are able to figure that out, you shouldn't discount, what you're actually doing right now. You should look at where the opportunity is in terms of your current practice area. And I say this stuff to people all the time, but no one ever, I would be visible as an expert in what you're currently doing. So that just means pretty much being seen when people are looking for someone like that. People are looking for you. So that's what I would recommend. And then in terms of finding the firms that you're interested in, most of the time it's just going to require, you can do the research, or someone from our company could, if you're one of our candidates, and send you the firms and then talk to you about them. But it's pretty much my big thing about client development is just really concentrating on what you're doing and being seen as an expert in that, and really branding yourself as someone that's done that. And very few people do that. And I think that would help quite a bit. These questions are second. Okay, this is actually a good question. Okay, this question is: do people ever start their career? And I apologize, I have to move between these. Oh, I don't know what happened just now. I'm green screen. Give me 1 second here. Yeah, I actually like this question. Okay, do people ever start their career practicing commercial litigation and later switch to labor employment, mix of litigation and counseling work? If so, can you please share a little bit about making this transition, relative pros and cons, big law or mid law boutique? Any insight would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so that's a great question. You can switch to labor and employment, and it's really not that difficult to. Let's see what's fun about this. Weird to switch to labor and employment from litigation. I think the practice areas are very similar in a lot of respects, and and a litigator can typically fairly easily transition into doing labor and employment. It's actually a smart thing to do in many cases, and in other cases, it's not smart. The reason it's smart to switch into labor and employment is that the billing rates are often much lower in labor and employment. And then also, if you're doing like labor counseling and litigation, and it can be much easier to attract clients because clients in the labor employment field typically need a labor and employment attorney on an ongoing basis. So our company, we have outside labor and employment attorneys in addition to in-house counsel that we, talk to every week. So they just get phone calls, and I can imagine that those same attorneys are working with a lot of people. So if you are a labor and employment attorney, it's fairly easy to build a book of business. It's also very easy to go in house because a lot of times the companies will need in house people, and so it's a very good profession and a very good practice area in many respects because of that. And you can make the switch. The drawbacks is if you want to be in a large law firms, many cases are moving away from labor and employment because the billing rates are lower. So what happens is because companies need ongoing assistance, there's a lot of competition from labor and employment attorneys. And so a lot of them are very expensive. Like an outside labor and employment attorney might charge $300 an hour as a partner in many cases, whereas if they were a commercial litigator, they might be $750 at a firm. So the billing rates are much lower. So a lot of times large law firms are moving away from doing labor and employment, and they really want to concentrate on litigation. I think you can make the transition. I think if that's something you want to do, you may have to move to a smaller firm to do it, or a firm where you can do that. Some of the drawbacks of labor and employment are a lot of the work is repetitive. So it's very similar fact patterns over and over again. Many people find it's not as interesting. I mean, there's obviously human drama and stuff, but a lot of times they find it's not as interesting. But the people that do labor and employment consistently typically do have a much better style of life. They have the ability to attract clients. They have a lot of other advantages. And I think it's a very good profession, a very good practice area for a lot of people. Also, if you want to go in house, you can go in house as a labor and employment attorney, or you can go in house many times and do HR. Those are some things I like about it. And I've seen a lot of people do very well going as labor and employment attorneys. And I think that there's very good reasons to do it. I think if it was me and I was practicing, I would definitely think very seriously about it. It's because you can have long-term business, and it's much easier to do. And the most part too, I think that labor and employment attorneys are much less stressed out than people from other types of firms. And so I think people like it quite a bit. Okay, let me just see here. I thought I just posted something in here. Let me see. Okay, sorry, give me a second here. Thought I caught in. What happened? Okay. Are there any reasons for a junior to voluntarily leave a top-ranked firm such as Sullivan and Cromwell or Davis Polk, which outweigh the benefits of having the longer tenure at these firms? I'm operating off the assumption that longer tenure top firm equals greater career options later, so I've turned on a lot of opportunities. Assigning lateral bonus seems like only good reason in the short term. Increased partnerships prospects, I think, makes sense, but wouldn't you still want to spend at least 5 years or so at a top firm for resume purposes? I laugh at the idea we'll get meaningful work-life balance at any firm paying market, so that would never persuade me to leave. But I do want to hear good reasons to jump ship, which are unrelated to stressful situations like being pushed out or stuck with a bad partner. Okay, so this is great. This is a very good question. Okay, so the first thing, let me just fix this here and just prone this mouse. Yeah, so the first thing is if you're at a top firm like Sullivan and Cromwell, Davis Polk, one of those types of levels of firms, the big thing that's important for everyone to understand that you should understand is at one of those types of firms at that level, You're learning from very good people, and you're learning in an environment where laterals are not brought in for the most part, and where there's a certain culture and ways of thinking about things that are very effective and have a lot of market value. It takes one of the things that there's I talked about this last week, but it typically takes about to learn how to practice law. It takes to do anything. It takes about 10,000 hours, 10,000 plus hours to learn inside of a law firm. You learn the basics in law school, but you learn about 10,000 hours. So really, what you should be thinking about if you're at a really good firm is the training you're receiving. Yeah, and the fact it's not what you get, it's who you become. So it's not necessarily the money is one thing, but it's what those firms are going to make you. It is what those firms will make you. Those firms will make you into to someone with a certain skill set that is very rare and very good. And I'm not going to get too far into it, but it's really not in the short term. It's not what you're going to get. It's what they'll make you into. And someone that gets 10, 5 years of experience at a firm like that is going to come out a much better attorney. And the nice thing about those firms is because they're not hiring laterals and trying to integrate all these different types of personalities and ways of thinking about business and so forth, they typically you're really concentrated on the work there. They have very good reputations to uphold. There's just a lot of things done very well there. These firms are like going to Yale Law School versus, I don't know, Michigan, which is a great law school, but there's just compared to other, Michigan, I don't know, but they're just, Michigan's a great law school too, but it's just, they're at a different level. And so the training is what you're receiving. So I wouldn't think about the money. I would think more about the training, and I would think about the person those firms are going to make you in the long run. And I think that's what's most important. But in terms of why would you leave, the reason you would leave is that only if you leave because they're holding you back. The firms are holding you back. They're going to be, what are they holding you back from? They're going to hold you back from becoming the person you want to become. So if you don't want to be a law firm lawyer, then you should do something else. You should, if that's really not what you want, then you should do something else. So in my case, when I left and got involved in this profession, I did so because that to me was something that seemed much more powerful than what anything I could possibly get from sticking in the law firms. It just wasn't in the cards. People, if you think about people like Bill Gates dropping out of Harvard or Steve Jobs just dropping out of Reed College, people do things because they're being held back. And so if these firms are holding you back, then you really should probably leave. You shouldn't leave for a bonus. You shouldn't leave. If you're thinking about leaving for a bonus, all that means is you're bored. People get bored, and that means take some time off or figure out some exciting stuff to do in your free time. But it doesn't mean you need to leave the firm. You only leave a firm if the firm's holding you back. And I don't think in your case, if you're in one of these great firms, I don't think you're going to be any happier moving someplace. So if you move to just an average AmLaw 100 law firm from there, all of a sudden you're no longer going to be a Davis Polk attorney. You're going to be one of those attorneys. And people are going to say this person worked at this firm, but then they're also going to say, wow, they worked at there and they don't understand that I'm better than them or whatever. I've seen a lot of people that I've known that have left Sullivan and Cromwell firms like that aren't happy many times when they go to new firms because they don't get as much responsibility. And they feel like they're being micromanaged and they're not, they just don't like it. So I think you leave a firm because the firm's holding you back. You may have something that says you want to start a chain of pizza restaurants, or I'm just making something up, and you think you can be the best in the world at that, or you want to start a technology company and you really believe in it, or you want to move to Africa and help build road. It's whatever your goal is, your long-term goal. If something is holding you back from doing that, then that's not good. So you want to only leave if it's holding you back. I don't think, like you said, there's a reason to go to another firm just for the sake of going to another firm. Going to another firm is not going to really make much of a difference for you. You may have more partnership prospects, but leaving your firm, if you leave a firm like Davis Polk or something, or Sullivan and Cromwell after 7 or 8 years, you're going to have the ability to go someplace else and be a partner, and that will go a long way, or go in house. And you will also probably be helped by people in the firm to some extent, and contacts that you make while there. So that's how I would think about that. but I don't think there's any reason to leave any firm unless it's holding you back. And it may be. Let me see. Okay, let's see here. Sorry, I'm looking for my map and problem. Okay. I started last fall, 2020, my firm, planned a lateral different firm, a different market after hitting the 1 year mark. I'm getting conflicting advice on whether to use a recruiter or not. I don't really know anyone in the market. I'm trying to move. I'm not sure how I should approach the process. Do people generally cold email people with similar backgrounds at the largest firm, law school alumni, and ask for a referral? I'm sure they would have an incentive to make the referral for a bonus. Also, I think laterally is down. Are there any other websites reputable websites for big law postings? So yes, but the question is, in your particular case, I don't know what your practice area is, but there's a couple different questions. And I think part of your question is, just because someone has a big law posting doesn't mean that there's any reason to use them. Law Crossing is a great source of pretty much every job. You should look at that. That's a good source of postings. You can apply to jobs there on your own. You don't need to use a recruiter to move to another market. I'm a recruiter telling you this, so I have every incentive to tell you to use a recruiter, but you don't need to use a recruiter in the market. The only really advantage of a recruiter, and these are in a legal placement person, the big advantage is using someone that not just contacts, but can package you in the right way, prepare you for interviews, and get you out to the entire universe of employers that you would want to work at. So those are really the only advantages so something like Laterally, or I remember hearing about that site several years ago. So I'm not entirely sure what it is, but I think it was some, guys thinking they could change the business by programmers or something. I don't know. But the point is that the only way to really reason to use a recruiter is if the person has a specific job that you're interested in. But if there's one job you're interested in, there may be lots of different jobs you're interested in. And almost every major law firm has their jobs on their website. So that's the same place that Laterally or whatever they are was getting their jobs from. Everybody has the same big jobs on their website. So all you need to do is, if the firms in the market you're interested in, is go to the websites of those employers. What does a recruiter or a placement agency bring to the table? They bring a lot more firms typically, regardless of the market. They package you in a certain way. They help you say the things you should be saying and not make mistakes. So there's just a million different ways to prepare for interviews. But a lot of that you could find on the BCG website and different articles and so forth. So it's not to say that you need to do that. Worrying about people making money, whether it's a referral or something, I don't know if you have to be careful many times when you're contacting people. So a lot of times if a firm, like, you don't know the status of the associate or whatever you might be emailing for a referral. And if you don't know the status of the person may be on their way out, the firm may not like them. Many times law firms don't like to hire through referrals because they know that if one of the people, the referrer, it gets down on the firm, then the person that's referred will also get down on it. You just have to be careful with all this stuff. But at the same time, anybody that's doing a job search, if you study this stuff and learn about it, you can do a lot of it on your own. You don't need a recruiter to move markets. You don't need a recruiter for the openings. They're all for a lot of the openings. You need a recruiter or a legal placement person just to do the types of research and so forth, if that's what you want. And it just depends on you. Obviously, I'm biased, but I don't like to even talk about this kind of stuff because I am biased. But I do think working with the right firm can be helpful. But at the same time, you have to be careful. If you're a first year, I would, really recommend waiting. You're going to be most marketable your second or third year, typically. You can move in your first year, but if you move in your second or third year, you're often going to be much better off then. Okay, I'm a fifth year M&A VC associate, about 30 with roughly 80-20 split of the work and a solid background in finance. In the ideal world, I'm in-house at a job that has better hours. I'm young without kids. I'm fine with not having a true 9-to-5, but I would like improvement, mix of MC, M&A and VC work. I use outside counsel for most deals. It's near New York City for remote work, open to work, allows for meaningful upper mobility, provides not too much of a pay cut. How likely is I can find this role? I think you definitely can find this role. I see resumes like this all the time. Most of these people go to work at I've seen go to work at They typically work at, I'm just trying to highlight this, VC firms, things like that. But I don't think it's going to be that difficult for you to find a position like that. Something I recommend too is just researching. The big thing that everyone should understand is when you're trying to find a position is the idea that success leaves clues. And anytime you're looking for someone to do something and you want to do a similar job to someone, a similar job, it's always important to realize that there's other people that have done what you want. So looking at other firms that are doing something similar are people that are doing what you want to do is useful. But I see resumes like yours all the time with people that have moved to different, they typically would move to private equity firms and that sort of thing and work there and enjoy themselves doing that. The other thing too, you can often, a lot of times people will do in your role, and this is just a fun thing, is sometimes they'll go to business school just because they want to get more exposed to the stuff. I don't think you need to do that, but that can also be a fun way to transition to a lot of those companies. But I think it's very likely you can find a job like that. I think you need to look in the right place. So again, I would recommend many times researching the firms that may have a need like that and cold contacting them can be very useful. Okay, how does partnership work at firms like Skadden, Latham, Gibson? I've heard talk of originating partner and also eat what you kill. I assume that has to do with which partner gets credit for the work revenue that's coming in, and that at least part of what determines their distributive shares of partnership profits for the year. Are there any other factors? More of a general question. There seems to be a divide in opinion between making equity partner. You must be a rainmaker to bring in business. No firm will make you equity partner unless there's a business need. And two, if you do good work, then you are well liked. You can eventually make partner if you stick around long enough and build enough hours. I don't know who to believe. I also hear that how the market is doing at the time you're up a partnership matters, or just the specific situation within your firm practice group at the time. I'd like to know more thoughts and reasoning behind this if possible. Okay, these are great questions, and there's quite a bit to what you're asking. But so firms like, Skadden, Simpson Thacher, Latham, and Gibson, none of those firms they really need to make partners. They have enough partners most of the time, so they don't really need to make partners. But they do, of course, they all do. And how do you make partner in a firm like that is often, like you said, it's a question that there's a bunch of different things going on. So the first thing is if you want to be partner in a major firm, the first thing is people do need to like you. You need to work hard and you need to show potential, all those sorts of things. And those are obviously important. And that's just if you want to do it at the firm you're with. The second thing is to become an equity partner in most of these firms, you do need to have business, and it typically needs to be fairly significant business. It doesn't always have to be, but if it's not business, then you need to be the preferred contact for a very important client or preferred or someone a very important partner that relies on. Or you can certainly make partner. And then the other thing you brought up was geography and economy, where you're at, economy, branch office or not, that sort of thing. Those sorts of questions. So the big thing here is that if you want to make partner in most law firms, you're going to need to work hard. You need to show potential. They're going to need to think you're loyal, that you're going to need to really be a standout. So you're going to need to be integral to the business that the firm's doing. And in most cases, to be an equity partner, the bigger the firm, like your Simpson Thatchers and your things like that, they have like very significant institutional clients, but they need to have a lot of confidence that you can handle kind of anything with those clients, that they can rely on you, and then that you're going to work hard and so forth. So there's a lot that goes into it. But the big thing to remember is most of these firms that you're talking about do not need to make partners. So the only way they're going to make you a partner is if you're just really outstanding and you have a lot to offer and there's a significant business case for doing so. And most successful partners in large law firms, they put themselves in a position where there's definitely a business case for the firm keeping them around. And so you need to understand that and the signals and so forth that whatever office you're in and so forth is giving off. But you have to work extremely hard. You have to do very good work. You have to do all these things. And in most cases, you need to really be pretty outstanding to become a partner in a firm like that. And it's one reason very few people are able to do that. One other thing, just it's important to understand, is there is the idea of sticking around. So sticking around is important, but at some point, a law firm is going to need to see certain stuff from you to understand if you have what it takes. And the market does matter, but really it's about being in a position where you're outstanding. And I don't really know how much more to say. The more you throw yourself into something, and the better off the more you're looking at the part, the more you're better off you're going to be. And it depends on the office that you're in. But to make partner at most of those firms is extremely difficult, and you need to be pretty outstanding. Okay. And I've written a lot of articles about this, but the big thing that I just would recommend is that you want to make sure that if you're someone that's made a partner in a major law firm, typically you're in a position when you do make partner in a firm like that, where you almost feel like you have a lot more to offer than the firm can possibly give you. And I don't even know how to say that, but you're so outstanding and you have so much potential and you look so good to the people around you that to not make you partner would be insanity on their part. That's a way you need to approach it. And that means keeping your emotions in check. It means being a preferred contact. It means working harder than others. It means being someone that other people in the firm want to work with. You just have to be really outstanding. And there's some firms where you may never be able to make a partner, like those firms where even being of counsel would be a big deal. Okay, so let's see. Currently trying to decide to join a firm as an incoming corporate associate. How am I supposed to know what type of corporate group we want? If if we have no experience prior to choosing, for instance, if choosing between Vol 10 non-New York handling M&A funds with private equity, Vol 10 handling public and private M&A, capital markets. I would like to choose a firm practice group that offers the most best exit options on the line, as a partnership track is not for me. Any advice? Okay, so the big thing is if you do want to be in an exit position, you need to understand, and if you don't want to be a partner in a law firm, then you need to position yourself in a way with the type of in-house job that you'd want. I don't know why you would want to be making these decisions right now, but if it was me, I think when you're a young attorney, I think the best thing you can possibly do is probably work in the best law firm you can get into, or the largest law firm. And that's important. So there's two things that are interesting that you're saying. I'm assuming that the non-Vault 10 is in New York, and I'm assuming that the Vault 10 is not in New York and it's in a smaller market. Pretty much if you want to do anything related to corporate M&A and so forth, New York is always the best place to get experience. So I'm not sure how big the firm is you're looking at. If you want to do M&A, if you are comfortable in the other market and it's a very good firm, then you might actually be better off working in the smaller non-New York. And I don't know if it's California or where you're talking about, but I think that typically you're going to have the most exit options working in the largest firm, because the firms, especially if what you want to do is go in-house, the firms all have brands, and when you're going in-house, the in-house companies are often hiring for the type of brand you're in with, and it's unfortunate, but often it's the larger firm is often considered much better, and that can be very helpful if you're working, especially if you're trying to work in a different type of practice setting. The larger firm can often be much better. The big thing that I would say, though, in terms of if you're looking at between two different offices in your firm and you don't want to do it long term, you may want to do it. You should always think about maybe working like 4 or 5 years out and working in a place where you can see yourself for 4 or 5 years. The reason is because, like I've recommended to several people on this call, getting 4 or 5 years of experience is very important. And so going to a firm where there's a lot of stability, where that work is going to keep going on for 4 or 5 years is important. So if you're looking at a Vault 10 firm that's in a branch office that is relatively new, you may not have a lot of long-term stability there. If you're looking at depending on the size firm you're looking at. So I would be very careful many times about non-branch offices or branch offices having long-term access to work, because you do need to make sure that you have long-term access to work. And that is really one of the big things that I always counsel younger attorneys. It's just to make sure that you have, that wherever you're going, especially if you're a new attorney, that you have that you believe that they're going to be stable for 4 or 5 years. And there's an article today, for example, in the Wall Street Journal that was talking about the bond market and how it's signaling that the economy may not be doing as well as everyone thinks. And so I've been doing this for so long, and what I've seen is the market go up and down. So, but corporate is definitely a market that gets overly inflated. And when there's too many people in corporate, the first people to go are generally the junior associates. And it can happen very quickly. I mean, it can happen like almost like within a month. The market can fall out over some reason. I don't know what it would be, but if there was, for example, I don't know, China or something happened at the Olympics or yeah, who knows? Any variety of things can affect the market and people getting spooked. And then the second it does, a lot of people can be affected negatively. So it's just something to be concerned about and aware of. Okay, so I would go to a place. My big thing would be the first would be going to the largest firm you can, because that's going to help you more, especially if you want to go in house and you'll get better training. But the second thing would be making sure if you are looking at a branch office that there's stability in that office. And then the third consideration would be for corporate related work, there's different reputations and so forth of different corporate types of departments. And so you should also look into that. The larger department's probably going to be better than the smaller one. I just changed practice areas and I just started a new job in the practice area that I want. However, I find another job at my dream job employer. I'm hesitant to applying for the new job opportunity. I believe if I stay with my current employer, will give me a great experience, but I'm really excited about this other opportunity. My current employer took a risk hiring me, and I feel I let them down if I leave. The other opportunity will likely have higher salary and it's perfect. Okay, so again, it's not what you get, it's who you become. What that means is it means a lot of times people will think very short term about jobs. They'll think, oh, I can get a little bit more salary. I can get this, I can get that. And what I really would just caution you on is even if you think right now that you want a different practice area, you want some different experience. These are young thoughts. And not when I say young, these are things that people think when they're young and idealistic. And I think staying with your current employer is probably the best thing. I don't know about a higher salary. And I think, that the employers will ask three questions when they're hiring. They'll ask, and this is down the line. Employers will ask, they'll ask, can you do the job? Will you do the job long term? Do we like you? And can you be managed? Whatever's happened, you were able to convince someone to hire you for a different practice area, which is great. But this question of whether or not you'll do the job long term is very important. Like people move jobs all the time, and there's nothing wrong with moving jobs under the right conditions. But if people don't feel like you're going to do the job the long term, then they're taking a big risk hiring. The best resumes are typically when someone's worked at a firm like 4 or 5 years and then they want to try something new, or they've worked at the same employer for 15 years and then they want to move. So people with a lot of employment stability, that means that they're not going to be caught up with these sorts of thoughts. I think that the fact you got this job in the new practice area that you want, I think that you should probably stick it out and at least try to spend a few years learning, because the more you do that, you'll probably be able to get a job at your dream job employer at some point in the future. I hire a lot of people in my job, and pretty much everyone that's ever had a lot of employment stability, I tell the story probably every week, but everyone that I've ever hired with a lot of employment stability is typically going to do better in the long run. And I always look for people with employment stability. And this is what employers do too. Okay, this is a quick question. Should candidates who are pending admission start applying to attorney positions or wait till they're fully admitted? No, you can start applying if your admissions are pending, definitely. Especially if you pass the bar, you can just put that on your bar exam. You should start applying right away. Where can we find the playback? There'll be a playback of this on the website. Hopefully it'll go live later this week. Let's see here. Okay, should I see a position with a small firm or with an AG's office? I think you can probably, it depends on what the small firm does, but I would recommend I think an AG's office would be a great place to work. It just depends on, what you're seeking. Let me just see here. I'm just looking at these questions. What should I tell a recruiter that I'm working with? To be more specific, I can help out with that. Okay. And this question is, how long do you need to work at a large law firm before you, sorry, I'm just going to pull up this question here for you. How long do you need to work at a large law firm before one is marketable enough to move to a different big firm, a top 20 law school? Typically, it depends on the economy. Right now, I would say it's 1 year. Again, I would recommend, I try to tell people it's better to try to stick around for at least 2 to 4 or even 5 years at one firm. If you're not happy there and you're not doing the kind of work, you don't like the culture, you feel like you've got a bad brand and you can improve it by moving, then there's nothing wrong with, or you feel you can move to a better firm times, there's nothing wrong with moving. But typically you definitely need to be there at least 1 or 2 years. One of the things is if you start moving firms frequently, if you move firms if you move in year one, year two, and year three, people are going to stop taking you seriously because they're going to believe that you're not going to stick around. Okay, I've been doing document review for 10 years. Is it okay to create an attachment with my assignments and transition to more substantive general practice? My assignments cover a wide variety of practice areas. Yes, of course it is. And this kind of goes for everyone on the call. If anytime you're doing work, like if you're doing document review, like you might be doing document review at like one of the biggest firms in the country. That doesn't mean you can't ever do substantive work. Just move to a smaller firm. There's no reason. I've heard document review attorneys like all proud that they're working at, this giant firm, but there's no reason you have to do all your document work at a giant firm when you could be doing more substantive work in other areas. So that's what I would do. Anytime you want to, move up in terms of your responsibility, you just need to move down in terms of the prestige level of the firm or often the size of the market. And anyone that's unhappy kind of doing work that you're doing, just move to a different market or a smaller firm. And there's just a lot of opportunity out there. So don't allow people to push you in one direction if you're not happy. What is the marketability of a foreign trained attorney without an LLM? Not very good. It's in the US. So it's very difficult to get a job without an LLM. I'm a law student who will be starting a job in a smaller market, but would also like to, this is actually a very interesting question, but would also to be barred in a major market if I want to apply for jobs there. Should I take both tests? And would that be sending the wrong message to my employer? Yeah. So it's very common. So if someone moves to a firm in Cleveland and it takes a California bar, you pretty much always know they're going to move to California, start applying to jobs there at one point. So I don't know that it's something you need to advertise to your employer that you took that bar, but there's nothing wrong with, a lot of times attorneys will be barred in New York or California and practice in smaller markets. There's nothing wrong with that. I do recommend trying to take these bar exams when you're younger because it's when you're right out of school, because it's definitely much easier then. And I don't know if you need to tell your employer about taking these other bar exams. Okay, this question about private equity and hedge fund attorneys. I don't have that on my job open. Let me see. Those about to lateral to remote. Any tips to get integrated? Yeah, so this is a good question about relocating moving as a remote attorney. I think I've actually been very impressed with people that work in our company remotely. But the big thing is just making sure that you're signing up for any opportunity to interact with people, to the extent your firm uses Slack and things like that, to be always on that, just to make sure that you're always being seen. And those are the most important things. And then being friendly, obviously, with people and so forth. Those are some of the major ways. The other thing that's important is to really ask for a lot of feedback on assignments. And if you're a junior associate, trying to find someone that's like a mid-level associate to help you with questions and so forth can also be helpful. All right, that's about it. There's a question about hedge fund and private equity formation attorney jobs. I would take a look at the BCG website for those and see what it looks like today and about that. And I think that's about it. And I will be back with you guys next week. Thank you everyone for attending today. I will definitely get a more interesting presentation for next week because I thought today's about legal recruiters and so forth was probably not the most helpful for you guys. But thank you when were you doing the next cover letter session? That's a great idea. Why don't we do a cover letter? This is a question someone asked. We'll do a resume review session maybe next week and then a cover letter one the next week. That's a good one to schedule. So I'd enjoy that. Probably we'll do a resume review and then the following week we'll do a cover letter session. So thank you for whoever just asked that question. It's a great question. And I want to make sure we do that. We'll do that next week. So if you guys want to all send your resume we'll send out an address after this to send that. You can send your resume and then I will review anybody's resume next week if you want to. The nice thing about the resume sessions you can change your law school or we won't put your name on it. All that stuff will be edited out. So no one will know who you are. That's a nice thing about the resume sessions, which I always enjoy. But yeah, thank you for whoever asked that question. I very much appreciate it. That's a great one to do next week. Thank you.